See, we have Yvonne. I can't tell who else we have.
Yeah.
So we have Yvonne, I think, on Zoom. Looks like Diane
And Bob, yeah.
and Bob there too.
Yeah. Everyone ready?
Yep.
Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening and welcome to the Attleboro School Committee meeting of Monday, January 11th, 2021. This is your notice that this meeting is being electronically recorded. We'll start tonight with our open forum. Is there anyone that would like to address the school committee at open forum? No? All right. We will close open forum and go on to our business agenda. Mr. Sawyer?
Thank you, Chairman. I have a number of updates for you for consideration as we discuss how to proceed with the district and the learning model that we need to operate in. First, I just thought it was important to review the various responsibilities that I think we have to keep in mind as we discuss and think through the best course of action. Of course, as a school district, our mission is around education, and so our educational responsibilities are first and foremost in our minds. And I know that throughout this pandemic, lots of concerns have been raised about our ability to deliver the same quality of instruction that families have grown accustomed to in Attleboro. And I wanted to just take a moment to acknowledge that the administration is well aware that we are not able to do what we would like to do and are able to do under normal circumstances. Our educators are working very hard to do the best they can under very difficult circumstances, but no amount of effort can overcome the obstacles that are placed in front of us. And that's no excuse. We have to do everything we can and keep thinking of new ways and finding ways to improve what we're doing. But I did want to acknowledge that we're aware that this is a difficult year in terms of what we're able to do, and that this is our chief concern. I would also add that I don't know about the communication that you've received in the last few months, but I think it's worth noting that what in the various things that we've done, the various aspects of what we do, I think there's a real mixed experience on the parts of families. And most communication I've received, assumes, I think, that most people are having the same experience that the person writing to me is. But I have to tell people that given how varied people's feedback is, I think it's important to note that whatever we do, it's going to work really well for some people, and other people are going to be utterly frustrated by it. And that certainly has been the case in our move to remote. Many families are struggling with that mode of instruction for obvious reasons. But at the same time, I receive other emails that say that this is a breath of fresh air and that our educational experiences for some families has improved as a result of this. More contact with teachers on remote days and such. So I do think that on the whole, we know that we can't do what we usually do. People are doing their best to make the best of a situation that is a challenge, and that various differences among preferences and circumstances lead to, no matter what we do, there are different winners and losers in people's perception of what we're doing. But as much as education is our first and chief concern, I think it's important to say explicitly that we have a responsibility to safety in the operation of our district. And this is on a couple different levels. I think first and foremost, safety is a precondition for our success. Students can't learn if they don't feel safe. And I'm here to tell you, educators cannot educate well if they don't feel safe. So it is really, really important that people are safe and therefore feel safe for us as an organization to be successful. And more than just feeling that way, it's really important that we are keeping students safe. Families entrust us with the safety of their children, and we have a responsibility to ensure that we keep the kids safe. And I would also point out that as an employer, and a pretty serious employer in the city, right? We have about 800 employees. We have a responsibility to keep them safe as well. One thing that has come up a lot in the last month is different claims about what's true about what kind of people catch the virus and who's really at risk of transmission of the virus. And I would just say that while, as I've said many times before, I'm certainly no scientist, I do have the unique opportunity to sit and look at our data, at the ground level, day in and day out as it comes across my desk. And I would say that there really is a trend in terms of age having an impact on levels of transmission, right? It seems to me that, the data will show that if you break our district up into 4 age groups, elementary, middle, high school, and then adults, right? Our staff, we have data on all of them. And while the greatest number of our cases, we've had 223 cases up till last Friday. And of those 223 cases, 82 of them have been at the high school. So not surprisingly, the oldest kids have had the greatest number of cases. Then you have 52 middle school cases and 49 elementary cases. Adults only have 40 cases, but I want to remind you that we only have 800 adults and we have 6,000 students. So when you think of our staff as, in terms of the percentage of our staff who's been infected with the virus, it's actually the largest number. So when you think of it that way, the older you get, the more likely you are to have been a positive case in the Attleboro Public Schools. And that goes down, so the adults as a percentage have had the most cases, then our high schoolers, then our middle schoolers, and then our elementary schoolers. But I really, really think it's important to highlight that as much as it's the lowest number, that 49 cases at the elementary school is real proof that young kids do get the virus, right? It is not the case that no young children catch COVID. We have, again, 49 cases in the schools, and I think that's a pretty strong indication that children of all ages need to be protected from the virus. The other thing I would point out is that there are a lot of questions around the safety of the schools, precisely because we do not know how many asymptomatic cases there are in the schools. Now, we follow the guidelines from the state, but we have questions about transmission. We take it to the state, and the state tells us whether or not it counts as in-school transmission or not. And as we sit here today, we have yet to have a case of in-school transmission in accordance with the way the state does things. But there are people who doubt whether that's really true or not. And I make no claims on whether it's true or not. I'm just relaying what the state says. But I think the skepticism comes from the fact that there are people who have contracted the virus, that there is no known source of that transmission, right? It's called, an unknown exposure. And the number of cases have risen since the beginning of the year. Early in the year, there were just, only one a month where it wasn't clear where the person caught the virus. Of late, it's been, almost 10 people per month. So that increase, I think, fuels the perception that people who we don't know where they got it, some people want to say, well, you got that from the school. Now, as I've talked about in other meetings, there are reasons to say that that's not the case, right? I do believe the schools are safe, and I don't think that, at least, certainly not a majority of these are attributable to the schools, because if in fact asymptomatic students were transmitting the virus, then we would see much more of an outbreak within the schools, and we would see clusters of cases as a result of that, and we don't. And we do know that our protocols are working with the students who have tested positive they're aware of. None of them have led to transmission, and we would know that because of contact tracing. So for all these reasons, I think that the impact of asymptomatic, up to this point at least, has been minimal, if not zero, as the state claims. But nobody really knows, where people who become positive, who, we don't know where they got the virus from. We don't know where that transmission came from. And so this is at the heart, I think, of people's concerns about whether or not the schools are truly safe or not, because it is important to note that there are people who have the virus who don't know where they got it from. And while the state would say, that didn't come from the schools, no one can definitively say where it did come from. The last responsibility I would just point out, and it's certainly the slightest of three, but it's still a real one, is that there is a public safety component to all of these decisions, right? We work closely with the health department, and we really appreciate their support through all of this. But Attleboro is a community, and anywhere there is large groups of people congregating indoors, the health department has a responsibility to make sure that those entities are following the guidelines and that they shut down anything that they don't feel like is either meeting those requirements, or whether they are or not, is leading to an outbreak within the community. And the fact that the health department recommended that we be in remote coming out of the break, it certainly seemed to me to be decisive in your reasoning for the decision at that time. And I should report that we met last Friday to discuss the numbers, and they feel like they went back and again validated that decision and felt strongly that that was the right thing to do for the good of the city as a whole. But they also feel like the results suggest that it is possible for us to safely consider a return to hybrid instruction. But the point I'm making here is just simply that because we bring large numbers of people together indoors in confined spaces, as much as we feel strongly that the protocols we're following help to keep us all safe, that we're doing that, the act of doing that is a risk, and one that the health department has a role in ensuring that we're not contributing to a very dire situation in terms of the spread of the virus here locally in Attleboro. And Attleboro's numbers are certainly troubling. And so this was a good transition into my update on our conditions here in the city right now. I think it's important to note that while our viral conditions are troubling in the current moment, they are not continuing to climb. We've been roughly at a number of around 50 cases per 100,000 for about a month now. And the number has gone up, it's gone down, but it's been roughly in that range for almost since the beginning of December. And so while that number is certainly a cause for concern, I think it's important to note that there's been some research of late that suggests that some of our suspicions about whether or not the protocols keep us safe under all conditions, or whether viral conditions in the community play a role in their effectiveness. There is some research to suggest that that is the case, that there's a limit to what the protocols we're using can do. And so the viral conditions do matter, right? We shouldn't just ignore them. But we haven't had clusters of cases. We haven't had a clear outbreak in our schools. Again, from the state's perspective, we haven't had in-school transmission. So it's pretty clear to me that at this level, as troubling as it is, we can operate safely. And the fact that it hasn't risen suggests that we can continue to operate. If the number were to start to climb again, the health department has made it very clear that they would want to revisit this entire conversation, and we have real concerns about continuing to bring large groups of people together in the school setting in a situation where we're already at a troubling number, if that starts to rise like it was earlier this year. Another thing that we've discussed of late is certainly our staffing woes. And we continue to have positive cases among staff. That continues to be a concern for us that we are managing. But as we sit here this week, that has gotten a little bit better, not worse. Although I would caution all of us, because in the remote mode, we have teachers who are able to do their jobs remotely. And I think that has led to some people choosing to work on a day that if they had to be at school, they might have thought to stay home If they were symptomatic, they might not feel quite so well. Now in the remote mode, they can continue to work because they feel well enough, but they don't have to expose themselves to anybody. Before, back in December, they may have chosen to call in sick for everyone's safety. So it's hard to know whether or not when we bring teachers back for a hybrid mode, whether or not we'll be right back where we were in terms of our staffing woes. But there's no reason to believe that in this moment that has gotten worse. I have an important update on our safety precautions themselves. We've made a significant improvement in the installation of the air purifiers that we've discussed previously. Those are now in all of our classrooms. They improve the safety of our rooms, and they help us to keep our buildings warmer, because under the guidelines, you don't have to throw the window wide open when you have an air purifier. You can just leave it open a crack, and that will make a significant difference in our ability to keep the buildings warm and help us to not end up in a situation where classrooms are too cold. So we're very excited to have those. We appreciate the city's support in acquiring them, and we believe that they will make a significant impact on our ability to keep everybody safe. But as I referenced, temps are a concern. The good news here is that this morning I checked the National Weather Service's 8 to 14 day outlook. In that period, which brings us through the period in question, we can say pretty definitively that the greater chance is for continued warmer than average temperatures for January, under which we believe that we'll be able to keep our schools warm. Now, there's good reason to believe that there will be certain classrooms in certain areas that on a cold day we might have to move people around to avoid that. But the forecast for the next 2-week period leads us to believe that temperatures should not be a challenge during that period. But before we take a victory lap on the threat of cold temperatures, you may have noticed in the news that the polar vortex has split. And this, they tell me, has a good chance of resulting in frigid Arctic temperatures in February. So while the near term is promising in terms of warmer than average temperatures for the district, we will be keeping a very close eye on this, because if the temperature drops low enough, we are going to have problems in certainly certain areas in certain schools, but perhaps entire schools will have a hard time maintaining temperature given the air circulation requirements we have to follow to keep everybody safe. So, good news in the immediate future, but something we're keeping an eye on in the long term. And then my next item that I want to go into a little bit greater detail is the news that we are ready to implement testing in the Attleboro Public Schools. It is no one strategy that the district can use to effectively return students to full in-person instruction, right? It's a collection of strategies that are going to get us from where we are now, where it's not feasible, to where we can actually bring students back in person, which is everybody's goal. It's something that we hope to do as soon as possible. And so among those strategies, which include things like all the precautions and all the protocols that we put in place, testing is one of the things that we need to be doing to have our kids back. And we need to, the sooner we get a testing program going, the sooner we can build confidence in it, learn how to do it better. This is not something we've ever done. We're not going to be great at it out of the gate. We need to learn from our experiences, improve our ability, and get to a place where we have real confidence in what it's producing so that we have good information. Now, a couple details that I think people should know. We're talking about pooled surveillance testing. Pooled surveillance testing means this is not a diagnostic test. It's not an individual test. We're not individually testing anybody. We are placing groups of tests, both adults and children, into the same vial, which then gets tested, and the test as a whole comes back either positive or negative. This practice, which is not new in general, but certainly it's just recent that they've been able to use it for COVID, allows us to bring the cost of testing down significantly. You know, each individual test is about $110. So when we're able to get 20 tests out of one vial, that's how we bring this very, very expensive test to scale to something that we can manage. With the federal support that we're scheduled to receive later this month, we're pretty confident that we'll be able to afford this, but this is a pretty significant expense. We think that testing is going to cost the district somewhere between $35,000 and $40,000 a week, and that's at, you know, a tenth the cost of the individual testing. So, you know, that's why it's not conceivable to do individualized testing. Pool testing is the only way to do it, and it's surveillance testing because, again, it's not a diagnostic test. It's a way of figuring out how much virus is in the schools and where it is specifically. We're very excited about this because most of the things we spend our time doing in the schools are reactive to positive cases, right? Somebody's positive, the damage is already done, they've already been in school, we do the contact tracing, we quarantine all the students. By doing surveillance testing, we will do a better job of catching cases before anything bad happens, and helps us to prevent transmission in the schools. This will address our concerns around asymptomatic cases, right? Right now, there's no way to know how many kids are asymptomatic and in what rooms they're in. By implementing pooled surveillance testing, we will be able to know exactly where and how many cases that we have in the district, and use that information to make good decisions about keeping our students safe. This is going to start as a pilot with our partner Ginkgo Bioworks, which are out of Boston. They are offering this for 3 weeks for free. And this is a way for us to do this in a low stakes environment where we can just build the infrastructure we need to be able to do testing. And then when the federal dollars come in and we have to start paying for this, we'll know for certain that this is something that we can pull off and feel comfortable with and can do. And it'll be a better decision to spend those dollars having had the experience through the pilot. I think it's very important to know that the test that we'll be doing in the district is not the one that I think we're all familiar with the big long swab. That is a very unpleasant experience for people who have had it. Luckily, I haven't had that experience yet, but from what I'm told, it's not something I should look forward to. This is a gentle swab. It's what they call an anterior nasal swab. It only, the swab is only used in the nostril. It does not have to be pushed way up into the nose. You're just swabbing right where it's comfortably in the nostril. It's a gentle test that will, I think, people will be surprised by how non-invasive it is. These tests will be conducted in the classroom. They're self-administered. Students give themselves the swab and then place it in the vial. This keeps our teachers safe. This also, again, allows us to test so many people without having to hire all kinds of professionals to test it, because you do not need to be a healthcare worker to monitor the testing, because again, it's self-administered. The big thing that I want to tell families who are watching at home is that this does require consent. People can decide not to give their consent and that we cannot test your child. But I would really ask that all families strongly consider participating in this program. The more people that test, the more effective it will be, and the sooner we will be able to bring students back to full in person. We have a long way to go. This is just one step on a long journey, but if we're ever going to get to a place in the near future where we can say confidently it's safe to do that, the information that this program will bring us will be imperative to making that happen. So I can't say enough that I'll be looking for families to do this. We'll be sending out communication tomorrow with more information and instructions on how to provide consent. While it's a pilot, we'll be reaching out to families and talking to them about the ones that have concerns. But there won't be a real push until we get a chance to get some experience under our legs and say with confidence that we know what we're doing. The final thing I would just mention is that because it is self-administered, at this time, we're going to only test grades 2 through 12. We've decided that because the younger kids are going to need support, and we don't know the test well enough and can't quite imagine exactly what we're going to need to do to make that safe and effective, we want to work with the kids that we know are old enough to do it, have that experience, and from that experience, make decisions about how to bring that to the lower grades. The intention is to eventually test all ages, but for this pilot, we're going to stick to the older elementary students as a starting place.
Mr. Geddes?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for your update so far, Mr. Sawyer. I just want to follow up while we're still on the testing subject. So we do the group of vials, it gets tested, one comes back as positive. I remember you discussed this back in December, but I don't remember the details. Is it that cluster then gets retested, or is it that those are individually retested to determine where the positive case came from? Or
So if we were fully in person, the move would be to test the class again, first with a rapid test, the antigen test, and then everyone who's negative, you retest as a pool to validate that the pool is now negative. And then through the antigen test, you should find at least one person who's positive, and then that person would need to test it as an individual to do that. But because we're in hybrid, if you're in cohort A, you come to school on Monday, so testing will be on Monday. We're likely to get those test results on Tuesday. But even if we don't get them till Wednesday, in either case, the cohort A students will be remote on Tuesday and Wednesday under hybrid. And so they're not here for us to test, and there's no practical way to bring them back safely, considering that at least one of them is positive. So I think other districts like ours that are in hybrid are following a similar course, which is to quarantine that class for 10 days and then return them after that. People are encouraged to go get an individual test, but it's not required. And we're basically going to keep the entire group out for 10 days until that period is over, and then bring them all back. They tell us that the number of pools that come back positive with the pilots that they've been doing is around 1%. So for every 100 vials, one comes back positive. We have about 250 in the district. So we're expecting a return of around 3 if that holds up. Where viral conditions here are bad, so maybe we're not going to be that lucky. But that was a starting place for our planning.
perfect, thank you.
Is it 1 vial per class? Or per cohort class?
So if we were in full person, it would be 1 vial per class. But
Right.
because a class is only half the number of students, we're going to actually be putting 2 classes together in 1 vial. So the number is like a class worth of kids. And so those 2 teachers in most cases will then, their cohort B will be together the next day too.
Right. So I guess my question is, or my next question is, elementary or middle school class, cohort A, they do the tests, it comes back positive. The teacher's tested as part of that cohort. So what happens with cohort B in that class? Or is the teacher not tested as part of?
Again, the 2 teachers share the vial, right?
Right.
So one of the teachers will test on Monday and one will test on Tuesday. They won't both test both days.
Okay. Got it.
And because staff are here every day, we will do the rapid antigen test with the staff the minute we get their test results. So, someone in the school is going to have to monitor the results. When the results come in, this pool tested, so the nurse will start doing the quarantining of the students involved. But the adults will have to someone will have to go down and grab the adult or adults that were in that pool, bring them to the nurse's office. They will do a rapid antigen test in the nurse's office. And if they are negative, We will then test them again to verify that, but they are free to go back to class under the guidance from the CDC. So they basically are presumed to be negative, and we confirm that through another PCR test. If they're positive, if it's the adult that was the reason why the pool was positive, then they have to immediately go into isolation.
Mr. Storrs?
How many will we be doing and how frequently?
How many?
How many students or students / staff? How many people?
Everybody.
100% second grade through
Yeah, and again,
12th grade
so when I
plus
said that
teachers.
there were about 250 pools, that's including the younger kids. We're not going to do them immediately, but like we're planning for a day in which we would have all of them. Yeah, everybody.
So we're talking a couple thousand, 3,000, what are we talking? Thousands.
Yeah, if we include the kindergartners and first graders eventually, we're talking 4,800 kids.
Okay. The reason I'm asking is 1% of that number is a lot. And if we're getting 1%, I know it's a rough estimate, but 1%
It's 1% of the
positive.
pools, not 1% of the people.
Right, I understand that. And the pools, you said about 20?
Yep.
Okay, so we can divide by the 20. It's still going to be a lot, and next thing you know, all our close contacts are going to go shooting up through the roof, no?
So because they're in a pool, there's no contact tracing. So there are no close contacts unless any of those people do go get their own individual test. So again, it's not a diagnostic test. No one in the pool is considered a positive as a result of the pool being tested, coming back positive.
But they will have to quarantine.
We will quarantine that group of kids, yes.
That's what I'm talking
But
about.
but they don't then have contact tracing on top of all that.
Okay, but what I'm saying is that our quarantining numbers are likely to go up because of this.
Yeah, if three pools came back, we'd have 60 kids who are in quarantine.
Mr. Domenici?
Thank you. So, obviously you've already mentioned that this requires consent. So kids can come to school and just be opted to not take the test, right?
Correct.
So what would happen in the event of that positive test? Say you got 10 kids in on one day and 9 of them take the test, 1 doesn't. Is that one that doesn't also
The entire group
quarantine?
will be quarantined.
So the whole group, regardless of whether you take the test or not?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Storrs?
Just to verify, this is an opt-in, not an opt-out.
You have to opt in.
Thank you.
So, yes, we will certainly, if we have numbers or even greater numbers like the ones that they're predicting, there will be more quarantines theoretically than we currently have. But from my perspective, to know definitively that all the other classes don't have any virus in them is worth the impact of that. That's the thinking. So again, I'll be sending a letter to families asking for their consent and giving them instructions on how to complete that process, and also providing them information that they want to learn more about all the testing. I should also mention that because there's no individual results, there's no concern for parents in terms of information about their children being shared with anybody or anything like that, right? So Ginkgo Bioworks won't know who's in them.
So, yeah, Mr. Held, go ahead.
Superintendent Sawyer, one quick follow-up question. Is there a certain amount of consent percentages that you have to get to make it viable? I mean, it's like, so if you only get 50% people, would it even make sense to go through with the pool testing?
I haven't been given a percentage per se, but the way I think about it is that every room that has someone who didn't give their consent undermines the safety of that room, right? So
Yes.
We need to eventually get to as close to 100% as we possibly can. For us to then use that as proof that we have the virus in control in the schools, and therefore we can make the case that we can start to consider doing some other things.
Thank you.
Mr. Sawyer, I know that this testing, the pilot and the funding, a lot of it has come to fruition through our federal delegation and representatives. But Governor Baker mentioned this pool testing last week in his one of his press conferences. Is this the same type of program that he was talking about, or is it different?
It's similar and different. So yes, Congressman Auchincloss has been instrumental in marshaling the resources to have this particular pilot possible. He has brought together the school districts and the test providers to help facilitate this, and has other plans for help to support schools, because he understands that if the parents want their kids back in school, and that for that to happen, schools need more support than we've been able to receive at this point. So this is independently through that. We've been working with then Congressman-elect back in December, right? And that's when we first started to talk about that. The program through DESE is similar in that it's some of the same test providers are working with school districts. That's going to be, I believe, a 6-week pilot that DESE is doing, because it wants to scale this up as well. And they're looking for people who are ready to try it. So we did submit our interest in that. I'm hopeful that the fact that we're already at this stage with this pilot makes us a strong candidate for the state to consider us for their pilot, because we're already doing the work. But I don't know if they're going to say that one somehow negates the other. But much like this one, the states is basically offering free testing to districts. But I imagine the demand for it's going to be greater than their ability to pick everybody.
Mr. Benici?
Sorry, just to follow up, because this, at least for me, it got kind of lost if you ever mentioned it. When would you be ready? When would we be ready to start this?
If we were to return to hybrid instruction next week, we would be trying to get it off the ground next week.
Okay, so communications would then go out in this week in preparation for,
Yep.
Getting it on the ground.
Yeah, I'm looking to send information to families tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
And, again, the idea here is that the sooner we rip this Band-Aid off and try, even if our early attempts are, imperfect, the sooner we'll get to a place where we're good at this and can start contemplating what the consequences of whatever we're finding are, right? So I've taken the approach that I'd rather do this soon and get better at it as soon as possible as a result of getting it going than waiting. I mean, we generally take great pride in, putting in our preparation and really, trying to do something as well as possible right out of the gate. And we will with this as well. But, this does, people have commented this feels a little bit rushed, and that's because it is. And the reason it's rushed is because I don't think there's any time to waste to do everything we can to take the steps necessary to try to get kids back at school as quickly as possible.
Ms. Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in the event that a cohort would be quarantined for 10 days, can we walk parents and families through what their educational experience would look like while they're in quarantine?
So basically that cohort would be remote during that 10-day period.
Okay.
So just like we're experiencing right now, the teacher would provide instruction for that class on, well, no, not like now in the sense that it would be every other, what they are getting in a hybrid, right? So if they're a cohort A student, they would get the teacher's full attention for the entire day on the 2 days that are their in-person days.
Sure.
And they would be remote like we are in hybrid on the other 3 days during that 10-day period.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mr. Storrs?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For students and staff who have already been positive COVID, I assume they would not be part of this, correct? Because you can continue to test positive even if you've already had it because it's in your system, and at the same time you're effectively immune for a minimum of 3 months. We wouldn't want them as part of this process.
I mean, that makes sense. I have not been told that explicitly, and we have not received our onboarding. I'm hoping to set that up in the next day or two. And that's certainly one of the questions that's on the list to ask.
Thank you.
Okay, so the final thing I wanted to report to the committee tonight is about vaccinations. As I'm sure you're aware, the state has a plan, and it's currently in phase 1. I know a lot of us have read about that there have been, certainly troubles with both at the state and federal levels for getting these vaccination plans up and running. Massachusetts was not immune to that, no pun intended. That said, I think the state has has made some great strides and is preparing to take the next step. And I think we're further along than some people assumed we were based on the bad news we were hearing initially. So in terms of relevance to education, phase 1 has been for obviously hospitals, and then this week the city started vaccinating our first responders. It's good to note that our nurses have been included in phase 1. So we're going to try to get all of them vaccinated before the completion of phase 1. And we have a subset of our nurses who are actually going to be helping the city in its vaccination efforts. And that actually puts them even higher in the priority list among phase 1. So that group will be getting vaccinated very, very soon, if not this week. K-12 is in phase 2. Phase 2 is set to begin in mid-February. And as a result, we already had our first meeting with the health department to discuss how we're going to approach vaccinations. The first decision was whether or not we were going to apply to be a place that receives and stores vaccines. We have decided as a district not to do that. We do not have the equipment, nor do we really have the staffing resources to take on what's a very, very serious responsibility. This is pretty serious stuff, and we just felt like we're pretty maxed out with what we have. But that does not mean that we're going to have to do what some communities are going to have to do, which is go to regional test sites. I'm sure you've heard about how some places you're going to Gillette and places like that to get your vaccine. We're very hopeful that we'll be able to work through the city, which will be a site. We'll be able to get all of our vaccines for our educators through the city, through the health department, and work with them to do our own vaccination program in our schools, which will be a great benefit to our educators. And the sooner our educators are vaccinated, that'll be another important step towards bringing us all back. And just while I'm talking about it, the testing program, so that we know definitively what's going on in terms of the virus in the schools, vaccination of the adults. The last one is the state has to change some of its guidance, right? Even if the first two things happen, if they don't change the guidance on, say, transportation, we can still only bring a third of the kids in by bus right now. So there are a lot of things that have to happen between now and when we can bring kids back fully in person. But I hope from this discussion tonight, the community understands that we are really proactively trying to put ourselves in a place that when things open up and when things change in our favor, we'll be ready to jump and do that as quickly as possible, rather than not be prepared for that moment as best we can be. That said, for anybody who's concerned about us, foolishly rushing in to bring kids back before it's safe, we're not going to do that until we definitively can say that it's safe to do so. So we're trying to, balance between those two concerns, get ourselves as ready as possible, but also, make sure that all the conditions are perfectly safe. The last thing I would say about our vaccination efforts is that, we are working on a prioritization. We do have say on how we vaccinate our educators, it seems. We're still waiting for more details, but the indication this week that we got both from the health department and from DESE suggests that we're going to have some say. And so if we have say, then it would be wise to prioritize our needs. And I wanted to relate to the community that while that's still a work in progress, our best thinking at this moment is that we would prioritize the teachers of our high needs population and our youngest students. So while some have made the case that we should vaccinate our high school educators first because they're around the older kids, and those kids are more infectious, theoretically. Again, back to our educational mission, we believe that, to the degree that remote instruction works, which I've already mentioned, we largely think it's not as good as what we normally do. I think that high school age kids handle it better, and that, the greatest burden of the limitations we have falls on our youngest kids. And so it will be a priority to bring them back first, and we will use our prioritization of the vaccines as a way to help make that happen. So I know I threw a lot at you here, but I'll summarize it by saying, based on the conditions that we are experiencing in this moment, and based on what we believe the next couple of weeks look like they will be, we believe that it is safe to return the district to operate in a hybrid mode starting Tuesday. Now, I think I should mention that inherent in this is, especially with the idea of testing allowing us to identify where we have positive cases that we can't see currently. Between that, the possibility of temperature problems, I believe we're getting to a place now where for most of the district on any given day, we can operate and operate safely, and that what we should do moving forward is simply identify where we have problems, either because a classroom has come back as a positive pool, or because we've discovered that a section of the building at this temperature we can't run it, which at this point we haven't hit that place yet, but maybe if it gets cold enough we'll find out where our problems are. But rather than take a district-wide approach to having decisions about where we can be open and where we can't, we should stay open and just close what we have to close based on what the various problems we're facing are. Staffing's another one. I mean, we had the closing at Brennan for 2 days. It's conceivable that will happen again in the school. So we have all these challenges to keeping ourselves operating, but we think the best way to do this is to leave ourselves open and make decisions to go remote for classes or grades or schools as necessary.
All right, thank you, Mr. Sawyer, for that comprehensive report. Just to recap, I think importantly there, it touched on a few different issues that are related, but also distinct, that being the current conditions in the city right now, the recommendation as to what we can do in the immediate future, being a recommendation to go hybrid starting next week, and then third, the presentation as to the steps that are being taken to enable us to return to fully in person as soon as we can, when all the factors that are required to be hit are in place. So I appreciate the district's considering the safety issues, but also being proactive and getting us in a position where we're ready to take that step when we can. Given the vote at the prior meeting and the recommendation of the administration today, I will go ahead and make a motion that the district return to the hybrid model beginning next Tuesday, January 19th, 2021. And just as a side note, the reason it being Tuesday is that Monday, the 18th, is a holiday.
Second.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. Do we have discussion or comments? Mr. Domenici?
Yeah, so thank you, Superintendent Sawyer. You've kind of thrown a lot at us. So to quickly sum up, we have air purifiers in all of our classrooms, so that should cut down on the need to keep windows wide open versus slightly open. So that's one thing we didn't have in place back in December. It seems that if you're recommending us to go hybrid, it's because the staffing numbers are at a point where you're comfortable having everybody back in the schools in a hybrid model, which was the other, or actually the primary concern that we have. On top of that, it looks like I'm happy to see that we have some testing coming our way. I'm sure there'll be some details to work out, and I'm sure that many in our community will have a lot of questions about how it works and what happens when there's a positive, but I think all these things are a good thing. And so, I think we took the necessary steps back in December, and I think it's time to take the necessary steps to get kids back in school in hybrid.
Mr. Geddes?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you again, Superintendent Sawyer, for the report. I agree with Mr. Domenici. There's a lot of great things to hear in what you had to say in terms of what's coming down the line and where everything stands. My only concern is that the spike that we saw following Thanksgiving happened to coincide with a lot of the staffing issues following Thanksgiving. And that spike would be hitting with this week's report and next week's report. So I think everyone on the committee can agree that some form of in-person learning is more ideal than hybrid or even than fully remote. But I almost wonder if it's worth us, rather than coming back on the 19th, having us come back on the 25th instead, to give us an extra week to get past what I think we can anticipate as a spike, to prevent any unexpected closures, at least for that week. And then, like you said, deal with everything for the rest of the year on a as needed basis related to classrooms and buildings. And still knowing that, to your point, February is still probably going to be very cold and may result in a district-wide closure or two, depending on temperature, because of the conditions of the buildings. So I don't know what anybody else's thoughts would be about returning on the 25th as opposed to the 19th, but.
Mr. Storrs?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 3 weeks ago, we made the decision to go full remote because of the evidence that we had from Thanksgiving and the impending holidays. We're past that. So we did what we felt was best. The numbers right now, as far as the tracing that we've been provided, overall, they're pretty flat. I think that's an important thing. We're past that 2 weeks. We're past, even from New Year's, by next week, we'll be past that time frame. Ultimately, kids need in-person learning. They need to be in school. I wish we were able, and we're in a place where we could be in full, but we're not there yet. But I'm hoping we can get there before the end of this year. I do want to say thank you to the parents and staff that have been contacting us, sending us emails. It was nice actually seeing some staff actually supporting getting those kids back into school in the hybrid mode. So parents have, I'm sure everybody saw the same emails I did, that the overall opinion from what I read was that full remote was not ideal, is a good way to say it. I could go into more details, but I won't. I'm just going to say that they definitely seem to prefer that we get back to some in-person form of learning. So the hybrid seems to be where we should be. And also, I think this is an important thing. So many improvements have been made to the schools. The purifiers and the vaccinations are going to be starting. But more importantly, I'm hoping that the surveillance testing is going to be a step towards getting kids back to school full in the future, a couple months down the road. Starting sooner is better than starting later. Starting next week is much better than starting 2 weeks from now. So that's my opinion.
Mr. Domenici?
Yeah, just a quick follow-up. Superintendent Sawyer, you and your administration, you do have the authority, right? If kids are back in school, if there's a temperature issue, if there's an outbreak in any one school or class, you have the authority to make those decisions without needing to come in front of the committee. So it's just a reminder that we always have some checks and balances in place, and we always have some controls, and we always have the ability to immediately address a need if needed. So, in the spirit of that, if the numbers are where they are right now and the schools are prepared, that was the premise by which we made the decision to go remote. And I think by this recommendation, I think this committee needs to make that decision to go hybrid, knowing that if we come up on some other issue, then we get together and we address it if we have to. But Dave and his team have the ability to also do that. And those are my comments.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I think if you look at 10 months or so, we've been dealing with COVID as a committee in a district. There's been 2 instances where a school or the schools in general have been closed by the decision of the superintendent on an emergency basis, one because of the outbreak last spring, and one this fall at Brennan, or early this winter at Brennan, because of staffing issues. And there's also been a time where the committee voted to go remote at a special meeting that we called when there might not have been as immediate an emergency concern, but a concern that we knew was real and was imminent, and wanted to give the community as much notice as possible. So to your point, there are a lot of different ways where we can ensure that the schools are, the students and the staff are safe, the parents are getting the notice that they need, and that the decisions can be made in a timely manner. So I think that's an important point to make. Any other questions, comments, or discussion on the motion or Mr. Sawyer's presentation? Seeing none.
Well, Steve, I had a
Yeah, sure. Sorry, go ahead, Mr. Hill.
never know when the right point to say, Steve. Okay, so I wanted to say that I would be supporting this motion to go back to hybrid, but I did want to make a couple of comments. I think it's always important to think of the big picture, and I thought Superintendent Sawyer did a great job laying out the big picture in terms of stakeholders and all of the competing interests that are all valid and all have a say. I think there is no easy solution, and there, for every parent who says that hybrid works out better, I had a bunch of parents who said that remote is working better for them. I do think there are opportunity costs for all of the decisions. I do think testing is the way forward, but I think it's important to say, $30,000 or $40,000 a week is an enormous amount of money. It would represent, if you were to pay a tutor $30 an hour, it would represent 1,000 hours of tutoring per week. It's a lot that we're doing here and investing into this program. I also, when you think about remote education, I have heard about some great pockets of, I shouldn't say pockets, lots of excellence. I also heard about some bad moments with remote learning. I still believe that, all of the students spending 5 days a week with their teacher through the computer is, more valuable than 2 days in person. That's my own bias. And, I can't, the more time, FaceTime with the teacher is better, and 5 versus 2 to me is always going to be a winner. I think there is also, and I think it's important that we allay this concern that once you go remote, there's no coming back from remote. And I see the remote as a great tool that we can use to keep things safe. So I think it is important that we make it clear that we can go back to hybrid and that we will be going back to hybrid. And that it's not just, we're stuck in remote, because quite frankly, we could face another situation where there is a lot of, a great uptick in the viruses. I do think it is, an awful situation to put teachers in. I do feel for the teachers in this, and I feel that for the people who have people at home who are, will be at a greater risk. There is really no perfect solution here. And there's no, again, you're balancing interests. And here, it's not getting skewed towards the teachers. So I do think it's an awful situation for teachers. And I do appreciate the sacrifices that they're making in doing this. I'm very pleased to hear about the safety protocols, the additional safety protocols. And, I think there are some real practical reasons driving the hybrid model. Our whole system is built around in-person education, and parents do want their kids in school. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. Any other comments? All right, seeing none, I will take the roll. Again, the motion is to return Attleboro Public Schools to the hybrid model beginning next Tuesday, January 19th, 2021. Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Geddes?
Yes.
Mr. Withers, yes. Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Storrs?
Yes.
Ms. Porto?
Yes.
Mr. Domenici?
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
I believe that's everyone. Motion passes.
Lined it up.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Sawyer, for a very detailed report and all the work you and the administration is doing to get this information out there and also to give the best education possible to the students while keeping everyone as safe as possible. So thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have anything more for us?
This concludes my report.
Next, we have our minutes from our December 17th, 2020 meeting. The minutes were circulated with your materials. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Right, Mr. Domenici,
Yes.
Ms. Porto,
Yes.
Mr. Storrs?
Yes.
Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Withers, yes. Mr. Geddes?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer?
Yes.
Next, we have the consent agenda. I will read the 10 items and then entertain a motion and consider them as a whole. It's a motion to accept a contractual obligation in the amount of $8,498.17 from Life Touch as broken down in the January 9th, 2021 memorandum. Motion to accept a donation in the amount of $179.97 from Chipotle to the class of 2022. Motion to accept a donation in the amount of $239 from Impact Custom Apparel to the cross-country team. Motion to accept a donation in the amount of $322.52 from Custom Inc. to the class of 2022. Motion to accept a donation in the amount of $50 from Target to the high school gifts donation line. Motion to accept a donation in the amount of $202.50 for the field hockey team from Attleboro Police Association. Motion to accept a donation in the amount of $930.94 from the Wamsutta Middle School PTO, Inc., as broken down in Principal Connor's letter dated December 21st. Motion to accept a donation in the amount of $50 from Looters Environmental, Inc. to Attleboro Public Schools to be deposited in the gifts donation line. Motion to accept the contractual obligation in the amount of $166.75 from Planet Aid, Inc., as broken down in the check receipt dated December 18th, 2020. And finally, a motion to accept the donation in the amount of $36,000 from the Feinstein Foundation as broken down in my memorandum dated January 8th, 2021.
So moved.
Second.
All right, Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Geddes,
Yes.
Mr. Withers, yes. Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Storrs?
Yes.
Ms. Porto?
Yes.
Mr. Domenici?
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes. Yes.
All right, thank you. Next, we have our subcommittee meeting reports, and we'll start with policy and personnel. Mr. Storrs?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the committee met on January 4th at the library at the high school, Learning Center. The first policy that we discussed was policy EBCD, emergency closings. I had asked for this to be put on the agenda for that evening, not because we were looking to actually take any action on it, but just to start holding initial discussions. That policy, our policy matches masks policy, but that policy was written in a, I guess you could say, in a different reality. Now that we are living through COVID and remote learning, this is a new reality. And as such, emergency closings are something that we can discuss about how to handle in the future. Obviously, we're not talking about this year. We're still in the hybrid and in the remote learning, but really we're looking at the future when we're past all this. The committee discussed it with the administration. I mean, ultimately, we still want kids to be kids. We want them to have a snow day here and there and that kind of thing. But at the same time, as I know the committee members know, when we create a calendar of a year, we do so with a 5-day padding for snow days. And also, we're not allowed to go past, for our 180 days of learning, we're not allowed to go past the end of June. And there have been a couple of years in the past where we've gotten close. We haven't actually gone past the June, but we have gotten close. And also, there's been discussions in the past how more learning earlier in the year is better than trying to make up those times in mid or late June. Ultimately, the policy, it gives the superintendent the ability to close schools for the day or in the middle of the day based on certain emergencies, situations. But at the same time, we did talk about would it be beneficial to add wording regarding snow days and giving the superintendent the flexibility based on the type of snow day or based on the situation as far as the calendar year, the amount of snow days we've already had, those kind of things, to decide whether or not to have a remote learning day during a snow day or an impending snow day. A great example would be back in December, we had a snow day. The superintendent closed the school to have a real snow day. I think that was the right call. There was a lot of snow. I know I was out there for hours. But at the same time, the next day was very icy. We weren't able to clean up in the city well enough where we felt it was safe for students to be walking into school. So we had another remote day. That would be a perfect example of giving the superintendent that flexibility. So ultimately, we weren't looking to make any decision on this at this time. We believe that MASC may be looking to modify this policy based on our new reality in the coming months. But at the same time, if we get to next fall and they haven't taken any action, it's something that we'll probably take a look at again. But does anybody have any questions or anything to add regarding just the general idea? Okay, very good. All right, so the next 9 policies, this is part of our 3-year annual, a 3-year review. All 9 of these, they are aligned with MASC, and we are just noting the review date. I'll read them all, and then I'll do a motion for these 9. So we have policy JICA, student dress code, policy JICF, gang activity, JJE, student fundraising activities, JJH, student late night or overnight travel, JLCA, physical examination of students, JQ, student fees, fines, and changes, KF, community use of school facilities, and 2 exhibits, KFE2, community use of the track, and KFE3, use of the concession stand. All of these were voted out unanimously from the committee. So I'll put it up to a motion to note the review date. Is there any questions regarding these 9? Okay, seeing none. Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Geddes?
Yes.
Chairman Withers?
Yes.
Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Storrs, yes. Ms. Porto?
Yes.
Mr. Domenici?
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer?
Yes.
And Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Thank you. The next 7 policies, there are some form of change. I'll explain them as I go through them, but I'm going to read them all, go through summary of all the changes, and then look to approve all 7 policies at the same time, unless a member asks me to separate a specific policy. First, we have policy JIE, which is pregnant students. We're looking to align with the changes from MASC, and the real change is that there is no need for our current policy for a physician's letter for a pregnant student who has had the child to come back to school. In our current policy, we have that inclusion. All right, is there any questions on policy JIE? Great. Policy JJ, co-curricular and extracurricular activities. We're effectively just removing an outdated Mass General Law reference at the bottom of the policy. Any questions? Good. Policy JLC, student health services and requirements. We're just adding a cross-reference of policy EBB to be aligned with MASC. Any questions? All right, policy JLCB, immunization of students. We're adding the COVID-19 pandemic clause so that we're aligned with MASC. Just to verify with administration, if I remember correctly, this is something that once we're past all this, we would bring it back and look to remove it, correct? The COVID-19 pandemic, right? Yes. Okay, so it's just being put in there for now, and we'll come back to it once we're past all of this. Any questions? Good. Okay, policy GCG, Exhibit E1, substitute pay rates. As I think everybody's aware, the minimum wage is changing year after year right now until we get to that, I think it's $15. As such, we have to change our substitute pay rates across the board to be able to be in compliance with the updated minimum wage. Any questions? Good. Next is policy JKAA, physical restraint of students. Legal counsel had provided some edits And the main thing is that our current policy required us to report to DESI, but that actually happens effectively in real time through the portal process. So we modified the language to that effect. Any questions on JKAA? All right. And the last one is KF-Exhibit 1, procedure for facility rental. Our finance director recommends increasing the rates specifically and only for professional organizations. Is that correct?
Yes, I was told to look at the germination of that, and that was when we updated our field and our track. The athletic department, which runs the rental of those facilities, started to get inquiries from professional organizations and asked for this.
Right. So we should be very clear, nonprofit organizations and school-related organizations are not being impacted or affected in any way by this change. It's solely professional organizations that are looking to rent our facilities.
Correct.
Any questions on KF-1? All right, again, all of these policies were voted out of the subcommittee unanimously. Would anybody want any specific policy taken up individually? Seeing none, I'll put them all up for approval, and we'll start with Mr. Hill.
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer.
Yes.
Mr. Domenici.
Yes.
Ms. Porter.
Yes.
Mr. Storrs, yes. Mr. Larson.
Yes.
Chairman Withers.
Yes.
Mr. Geddes.
Yes.
And Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
All right. And the last item that we discussed was a new job description for help desk technician. If I could have the administration just give us a small summary.
The help desk technician is was put in place to assist with staff and parent inquiry into general questions around user ability, the password login, things like that, as well as other evolving roles. So I'm sure responsibilities will be added over the year, but it's a great benefit to support our OIT department as well as our staff and parents.
All right. Any questions on the help desk technician job description? Okay. Again, this was voted out of the subcommittee unanimously. So I'll put it up to a motion and up to a vote. Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Geddes.
Yes.
Chairman Withers.
Yes.
Mr. Larson.
Yes.
Mr. Storrs, yes. Ms. Porter.
Yes.
Mr. Domenici.
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer.
Yes.
And Mr. Hill.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And it was brought to my attention, I did miss one of the policies, the KF-R1, community use of school facility regulations. Can you please refresh my memory on what we changed on this one?
Custodial fees apply to the use of the facility.
Okay. All right. So are there any questions on the policy KF-R1? So again, this was voted out of the subcommittee unanimously. I'll put it up for a vote. And Mr. Hill.
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer.
Yes.
Mr. Domenici.
Yes.
Ms. Porter.
Yes.
Mr. Storrs, yes. Mr. Larson.
Yes.
Chairman Withers.
Yes.
Mr. Geddes.
Yes.
And Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, administration. And Mr. Chairman, that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Storrs. Finally, we have finance and budget. Mr. Larson.
Finance and Budget Subcommittee met January 6th. We do not have any motions coming forward. We had a lengthy discussion about a few things. The administration already told us about the air purifiers that were deployed in the buildings. The new Chromebooks have been deployed to the schools, and there's a target date of the 18th of January to get them in the hands of all the students. We had an MSBA update. The new high school is currently on schedule and on budget. The current building is going out kicking and screaming. Since we last met, we've had 6 major steam leaks. A building continues to just show its age, and it's going to go down swinging. We reviewed the budget As we've been talking about since the beginning of the year, we've been fighting a deficit of approximately $2 million because of COVID. We've used the city's COVID grant at this point, and we've been able to fund the first 6 months of extra staffing. We've also been able to fund the extra cleaning and the extra maintenance that was needed to be done at the beginning of the year so that we could open school. The school's COVID grant, we found out, has now been extended until December 31st, 2021. That had been set to expire at the end of 2020, so that's good news for us going forward. We'll be able to use some of the school's COVID grants to pay for some of the staffing costs that we have coming up for the second half of the year. We still have about a $500,000 deficit that we're going to have to deal with from operations. Primarily, this is from the lunch program and from Abacus. Currently, COVID funding cannot be used to reimburse these programs. So like I said, we'll have to find that money from operations at this point. We also expect that there'll be funds coming from the latest stimulus package that Congress just passed and the president signed. At this time, we don't know exactly how much money that will be, and we don't know what we're going to be able to use it for. So far, every grant that we've received has different guidelines, so the funds have to be used for different reasons. So that creates a little bit of a challenge. And just as a personal note, having watched some of this firsthand, I really want to recognize folks in the business office and the administration, the folks at City Hall. They've been doing a great job keeping all of these different types of funds straight. I can't imagine the amount of work that's going into all of those offices above and beyond their regular duties. So my thanks to all of them. And that's the extent of my report.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. Anyone else have any business items? Mr. Domenici?
I just had a quick follow-up, because it is mid-January. Are we starting the process of, and I hate to do it knowing that we're still trying to figure out things in this current year's budget, but are we starting the process for the next fiscal year budget? It's usually right around this time that you start hearing some news, or is some of that delayed a little bit?
If you want. We did vote as a committee about a month and a half ago to extend the administration's policy that's in place, that they provide an outline of next year's budget to us in December. We've pushed that date off, and we approved that we should have that presentation at the end of February.
Okay, thank you.
So-
Thanks for refreshing my memory.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Ms. Sawyer,
Yes.
Mr. Hill,
Yes.
Mr. Domenici,
Yes.
Ms. Porto,
Yes.
Mr. Storrs.
Yes.
Mr. Larson,
Yes.
Mr. Withers, yes. Mr. Geddes,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
All right, meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.